China posing a threat to American agriculture. Not only the farmland it's buying, but the billions they're spending to catch up with American innovation. Yet Nebraska stands out. We'll see how the Cornhusker State is bucking trends with an increase in ag research. Plus, ranchers weigh in after the fires at the Nebraska National Forest. We continue our in-depth look at carbon pipelines and steak and eggs. From the pasture to the plate, we'll meet our Farm Youth of the Month. It's time to grow. Welcome to Grow. Nebraska is a global force in agriculture, but China is catching up. The U.S. Department of Agriculture says China is now the biggest spender on agricultural research and development. China has surpassed the U.S. and Europe. President Biden's budget calls for more spending, especially in areas related to a changing climate. Nebraska is a global powerhouse, yet funding for agricultural research nationally has trended down for decades. But not so here, where those dollars continue at a record pace.
Switch between steering modes here,
Husker scientists have their hands on the controls of a farming revolution. Robotics, sensors, artificial intelligence.
All the cool stuff.
There's really exciting research going on here.
The University of Nebraska celebrates 3 consecutive years of record-breaking funding for ag research.
We're a solutions-based approach. And so every day I get up thinking about agriculture, thinking about our natural resources.
The university's new head of agricultural research says food, water, and climate are priorities, helping farmers become more efficient.
Inputs need to be reduced potentially, but then we also got to maintain our yields.
Nebraska is bucking national trends. The USDA says public funding of farm research has been declining for decades, while China's spending has increased.
It very much is a concern, and not only are they outpacing us, the Europeans are outpacing us too.
Senator John Bozeman is the ranking member of the Senate Ag Committee. During a visit to Nebraska, he said American farmers are highly productive.
We have been the leader. We've developed this stuff, but you can't sit on the couch.
Bozeman says research is the answer on climate, plus global dynamics can have an impact on your wallet and your dinner table.
It's really also about national security. We saw in COVID some of the challenges we would have if our food systems and our supply chains got pinched.
UNL received nearly $71 million in external funding last year, including 14 grants of $1 million or more to tackle issues like drought and conservation.
So we really want to make sure we're resilient and that we're investing in agriculture.
The president's budget calls for a $300 million increase in agricultural research, yet that's still billions and billions short of what China is investing. Governor Jim Pillen says a high court ruling is a blow to livestock producers. The Supreme Court recently upheld China's Proposition 12. That was a 2018 ballot initiative banning pork that doesn't meet the state's standards. Governor Jim Pillen, himself a hog farmer, expressed frustration with the ruling. In his words, quote, "This radical California law will have widespread detrimental and lasting impact. This decision is a huge blow for producers and will raise food costs for consumers and small businesses already struggling with mounting inflation." The wildfire last fall damaging the Nebraska National Forest in Halsey. Now Taylor Leverett has more on efforts to rebuild.
Charred tree limbs cover many parts of the National Forest and grassland in Halsey, giving a glimpse into what happened just a year ago.
The fire was in the crown of the trees. That means it's actually running through the top of the trees rather than on the ground, and that kills all the trees.
Over 9,000 combined national and hand-planted forest lands destroyed by the unrelenting flames of the wildfire. The Halsey community met to discuss the future of the forest. Hunters, first responders, and ranchers shared ideas on how to bring back the trees that were lost and preventing future flames.
But we need the public to understand how important that is to the ecosystem and the economics.
Rancher Brenda Mushik says forest restoration begins with educating visitors on the hand-planted forest.
They need to understand what's going on here and how that impacts those of us that have our livelihood close by. And, what I would really like to happen is I would really like to have every ATV have a fire extinguisher like a boat does.
Mushik says the land of the sandhills is different than most, adding that grazing could help to bring back the roughage the soil lost to the Bovie fire.
Grazing of cattle helps this ground because it compacts it. You put cattle on this ground and it compacts it, and that stabilizes it. And they defecate on it. I mean, they pee and they do that kind of stuff on it, and it does. It helps make topsoil.
Wright says forest land makes up a big chunk of total land in the state and the country.
This is the largest hand-planted forest in the United States, and it's in the middle of the largest grassland remaining in the world.
He adds the importance of restoring serves both for society and culturally. As far as the next steps of the restoration, Wright says they are at the collecting ideas stage of the process. But in the coming weeks,
environmental assessment would be what we would do later on, and that'll be the more formal process that we haven't began yet.
The Biden administration announcing $11 billion in grants and loans to bring clean energy to rural communities. Rural electric cooperatives, rural energy companies, and electric utilities will soon be able to apply for the grants and loans, which are being funded through the Inflation Reduction Act. The White House says the investments aim to provide rural areas with more reliable power grid, create new jobs, and help lower future energy costs. Turkey's president announced an extension to the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Russia has agreed to extend the deal for 2 months. It allows shipments to pass through the embattled waterway without threat of attack from either side. Russia has threatened to bow out of the deal multiple times, saying its own food and fertilizer shipments haven't been included. Turkish officials say they will make sure all conditions are fulfilled. Ukrainian leaders accuse Russia of slowing down the joint inspections of the ships, delaying exports.
We should not need to remind Moscow every few weeks to keep their promises and to stop using people's hunger as a weapon in their war against Ukraine.
Much of the Ukrainian wheat and barley exports head to parts of the world dealing with hunger struggles like Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. The deal has helped lower prices for the grain worldwide. Later, our Farm Youth of the Month putting steak and eggs on the table. Up next, we continue our in-depth look at carbon capture pipelines.
This portion of NTV's Grow is sponsored by Acres Equipment, solutions for every field. Acres has what you need to get the job done.
Would you allow a carbon capture pipeline to cross your land? We're hearing from one of the landowners who says they would. Reporter Katie Koppel has more.
Kelly Newenhouse is no stranger to hard work.
I'm a family farmer. I farm with 2 brothers. Been farming, this will be my 40th year.
Agriculture is in his blood.
My dad was a farmer.
He's been part of the biofuels industry for years and has watched it grow.
I've been involved in the biofuels industry for 20 years. In the last 10 years, I've been involved in the industry and definitely focused on carbon index reductions or carbon intensity reductions.
Farming in O'Brien County, Iowa, he's one of several landowners who have proposed carbon capture pipelines mapped for their property. And he's already on board.
And I'm the one that in the family that has both Summit and Navigator, and we've already signed our easements.
Summit Carbon Solutions and Heartland Greenways Navigator CO2 Ventures are 2 liquid carbon capture pipelines in production through the central United States. They would carry liquid CO2 from ethanol plants to a central location for underground sequestration. The success of these pipelines relies largely on voluntary easements signed by the landowners, like Newenhouse, on the route.
I was on board right away, absolutely.
Carbon has become a commodity in the ag industry, and it's in many everyday items we use.
A lot of this stuff is used in carbonation. It's used in refrigeration. It's used in dry ice. That market's somewhat saturated, so we need to find another place for the CO2 to reduce the CO2 emissions.
And as Newenhouse explains, biofuels is the 3rd leg of the agricultural stool.
Prior to the ethanol industry or biofuels, we had livestock and we had exports. And we, you know, if those didn't work or the export numbers were down, we overproduced and we're subsidized. And then we built the third leg of the stool, the biofuels industry. And that's been absolute best wealth building industry over the last 50 years.
The area of Neuenhaus's farmland where the Summit and Navigator pipelines will be laid is a few miles from his home. We drove to the area so I could see it for myself.
The Summit pipeline is going to go straight east and west right here. Just over the hill there, I've got a natural gas pipeline that goes diagonally. That's been there for 40, 50 years. And then behind that, probably 200-300 yards to the west of that is where the Navigator line is going to go diagonally across. So this field will have both the Summit and the Navigator pipeline through it.
And how much of this is where the easement is for the construction phase?
Well, they're going to have a 50-foot wide permitted easement and then about a 50-foot temporary during the construction phase. So maybe from about here to that power line.
Neuenhaus has already received part of the payment for the estimated crop damage to his land. The Dakota Access Oil Pipeline runs through his farmland as well. Several years removed from when it was installed, he says he doesn't see any change in yield.
You know, we've got yield maps that show over the last 2 years, we can't see the pipeline. We're pretty confident that over time, you know, I'm not saying it's an instant repair. Things take a few years, and that's why they pay you 3 to 5 years in crop damages or more if there's an issue.
Overall, Neuenhaus sees carbon capture as the next major step forward for the ag industry.
That's a huge step to the race to net zero, and I think we can get to net zero in the next decade in biofuels. And with the energy of the world focusing on low carbon, we need to continue to improve our process to stay in the game.
Many have seen much needed rain. Regina Bird is in next to see what the impact has been on the drought.
NTV's Grow Weather is sponsored by Acres Equipment, solutions for every field. Acres has what you need to get the job done.
We'll start off this week's Grow Weather forecast with a check of the drought monitor across the region. There have been some improvements, so that is the good news. But you can see still some drought conditions stretching up into the northern plains and then off to our south into Kansas as well. They have that large area of exceptional drought from Wichita toward the western part of the state, central part of the state dealing with some of that too. Let's take a closer look across Nebraska because there were some beneficial improvements, some beneficial rains that fell that led to some improvements across mainly northern to western Nebraska down to parts of northwest Kansas. Unfortunately, portions of central Nebraska did see those drought conditions worsen because they didn't see as good of rains this past week. But in terms of this week's drought monitor, we still have that exceptional drought highlighted in the maroon shading, outlined in the red. That's extreme drought, then severe drought in orange, moderate drought in the tan shading, and then abnormally dry conditions highlighted in yellow. Still very small sliver of southeast Nebraska, looking at no drought conditions according to the latest drought monitor. Let's look ahead toward June though. This is our temperature outlook. We are looking at central to eastern parts of Nebraska, down in northern Kansas, likely to see above average temperatures for the month of June. That stretches up into the northern plains, off to the west as well. The southern parts of the U.S. looking at that possibility as well, and then parts of the northeast looking at the possibility for above average temperatures when you average out the entire month of June in those numbers for temperatures. And then something we haven't seen for a while, our June precipitation outlook, looking at above normal precipitation currently forecast from western Nebraska towards parts of central Nebraska down into western Kansas too. That stretches down to Oklahoma, parts of Texas, and then off to the west as well. There's a small sliver of the northwest looking at below average precipitation for the month of June, and then we are looking at above average precipitation for the state of Florida, a lot of it I should say, and then that stretches into other parts of the south too. Let's look farther out. June, July, August temperature outlook. You can see from the east coast down toward the south and then up to the west, looking at the high average possibility of above average temperatures for that 3-month period. This includes a small area of the panhandle too, parts of Kansas included in that, but a lot of Nebraska and almost all of northern Kansas looking at equal chances. So we're not seeing any shading in those areas because we have equal chances. And then farther out for the precipitation outlook, you can see parts of the East Coast, then off to the west, near the Great Lakes, down toward the south too. Looking at the likelihood of above average precipitation for that 3-month period. And then anywhere with that tan shading, likely to see below average precipitation for that time frame. Here's our almanac for this week. Normal high right around 74 degrees, normal low right around 52. Our week ahead average high is above that. We see those temperatures really hovering right around that 80-degree mark. And then our week ahead average low right around 55. And then our proverb for this week, very short, but as the Friday, so the Sunday. That's a check of your Girl weather forecast. We'll have the latest coming up next week.
Whether you're planting, branding, or doing other work on the farm and ranch, we want to see your pictures. Go to our website, Nebraska.tv, and chime in. The price of eggs for consumers is dropping, but it's too early to tell what the trend will be long term. Sinclair's Angela Brown has more.
The high price of eggs making consumers crack and breaking budgets. At one point, over $7 a dozen in some states, breaking records.
$7 for a little container of eggs? I'm about to get a chicken or something, I swear.
High prices dropping for now. The American Farm Bureau Federation pointing to a drop in the avian flu outbreak.
You're seeing very low outbreak levels of avian influenza. So flocks are, at this point, having a little bit of time to rebuild.
This one number tells the story. This May report from the Department of Ag found over 58 million birds affected overall, but the number of affected birds dropping since February.
We're seeing in these chicken and egg reports that our inventories are starting to come back just a little bit at a time.
You may not see big savings at the grocery store just yet.
Prices go up like a rocket and they come down like a feather.
Prices coming down but still higher. Look at these numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. April, a dozen of eggs around $3.27, down from $4.80 in January. But look at January of 2021, $1.46. Senior analyst Ted Rossman from Bankrate says prices may never drop that low.
I also think some of this gets kind of baked in. I think that it is hard for retailers to lower prices. I think sometimes they do view it as a way to grab additional profit margin. I think they would also say, well, their costs are up on various things.
Still in danger of prices creeping back up? And still not clear of the avian flu outbreak.
There's no way of truly knowing if this thing is coming to an end or if we might see cases start to pick back up again in the upcoming year.
Steak and eggs. A local teen provides food from the pasture to the plate, and we'll meet our Farm Youth of the Month coming up.
Ag Youth of the Month is sponsored by Landmark Implement. Experience the Landmark difference with locations across Nebraska and northern Kansas.
Summer break is no vacation for farm kids, putting in the effort to put food on your dinner table. Feeding cattle to feed you. While some teens spend summer at the pool or in front of a screen, Claire Ahrens takes the reins.
Your teammate is a 1,000-pound animal that you have to work with all summer.
These cattle are hers. She started a small herd that's helped her see how beef goes from pasture to plate.
I know how it's grown, and I know what it's fed, and I know product from birth all the way to when they are harvested.
Along with her brother, they've hatched a business.
It's called Steak and Eggs.
It's beef production and poultry production.
It's like homegrown beef.
To expand her customer base, she'll be taking her cattle to a federally inspected butcher, which allows her to sell individual cuts.
They can order some online, and then we can go ship it.
She has the support of her high school egg teacher, but around the farm, he's just dad.
A little bit of encouragement at home, but yes, she puts in the hours and time.
Heath Ahrens taught in Ravenna for 17 years before planting the egg program in Pleasanton. Heath has deep roots in the community with his own family farm, and FFA has blossomed with dozens of kids and their own greenhouse.
I help put up the walls.
Claire was recently awarded a grant to grow her business and get a deeper look beyond the burger.
What supply and demand is like, what prices are like, and so it gives you the big picture on a small scale.
This isn't Dad's project. Claire does the heavy lifting with a real-world experience opening new opportunities. And her dad may be her egg teacher, but he says she has definitely done the hard work herself to get to the point she's at. Reporting near Pleasanton, I'm Steve White.
NTV's Grow is brought to you by Aurora Cooperative. Tougher together, Aurora and you.